Thank you, everyone, for attending our CBE lecture today, and many of you have been attending just about every one that we've had. We're really happy to have Dr. Scott Mitchell from IBS, one of our deans there, as our speaker today, and he's going to be speaking on the future of American Buddhism. American Buddhism is Dr. Mitchell's sort of area of expertise, and so it's something that concerns all of us, our future, but also Buddhism in general, how we look to the future here in this country. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Scott Mitchell, our speaker for today.
Thank you so much, Sensei. Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you to Koichi and Judy and Yumi and everybody else at CBE who's making this possible. I think it's really fantastic. We've been able to maintain some sort of connection during these unprecedented times. I'm gonna try to share my screen and start a little slideshow. I can't see anybody, so hopefully people can see this. If somebody wants to, one of the organizers wants
Yes, we can see you.
Great. Perfect. Okay, so the title of this week's talk, well, the title of both this week and next week, of course, is Looking to the Future of American Buddhism. This is a question that I get asked fairly frequently, some version of what do I think the future of American Buddhism will be, or folks are interested to know about current trends. And if I'm being totally honest, I'm actually not really a fan of this question. Even before the pandemic, when it was easier to imagine the future, thinking about the future of American Buddhism was one of my least favorite topics. So I thought today, instead, what I'd do is talk about, if I can make my screen, I thought I'd talk about Star Trek. This is very strange not being able to hear anybody, because usually these dumb jokes get some sort of laugh. But anyway, I promise that I will today talk about Buddhism, but first I want to say a couple of things about Star Trek. So folks who know me know that I like science fiction, and Star Trek is one of my go-to sources. I grew up on the Next Generation series, so I'm going to choose Picard over Kirk any day. And even if you don't like Star Trek or you don't know anything about it, I'm sure that you know that it takes place in the future, when the Enterprise is on its 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds. Humanity has created a future utopia, an idyllic world that's gotten past all of the stuff that makes our world pretty lousy. It's a post-scarcity economy. People don't work to accumulate wealth, but to better themselves. Thanks to replicators that can make food, hunger is gone, and in fact, no one eats meat anymore. There's no war, no poverty, no disease. People solve their problems through diplomacy and cooperation, and they listen to science and scientists. And technology is used skillfully to make people's lives objectively better. The hope of a future utopia is alluring, as is the hope of a better rebirth in Sukhavati. But for me, what's also compelling about Star Trek is this in-between state. How do we get there from here? How does humanity go from all of this to this idyllic future utopia? According to Star Trek's history of the future, there's an answer, of course, and that answer is war. A massive global war that leaves hundreds of millions of people dead, governments no longer functioning, and chaos everywhere. In other words, to get to the utopian Pure Land of the Star Trek future, one must go through the Avicii hell of global destruction. Of course, that's not the real answer. The real answer is that after the global war, humans invent warp drive, which attracts the attention of the Vulcans, who come to Montana for some reason, and humanity realizes it needs to get its act together so that Kirk and Spock and McCoy and Picard and LaForge and Troy and even Wesley can go gallivanting across the galaxy. Anyway, when people think about Star Trek, they often think about this end result, the future utopia. And I think it's worth pointing out that to get there, humanity needs to go through hell first. Total chaos is part of the story. It's an acknowledgement that we're not there yet, that we have a lot of work to do, and it's going to be hard to get there. So why am I talking about all of this? Why am I wasting your time on a Saturday morning to reflect on this fictional history of the future? I think it's important to imagine, to dream, to conjure things up. I intentionally drew a connection between the Star Trek vision of the future and the Pure Land Sukhavati because the Pure Land is also a conjuring. Unless it's really real, unless we can actually board the Starship Enterprise, head west, and eventually beam down to the jeweled surface and hang out with Amida, Sukhavati is a vision of an idealized world. And when we conjure, when we dream up idealized worlds, whether they're Buddhist worlds or science fiction worlds, we're almost always projecting our own hopes and dreams and reservations and fears about our current world into those imaginings. When I first agreed to be a speaker for the CBE this summer, I assumed we'd all be sitting in the Kodo of the Jodo Shinshu Center in Berkeley right now. Instead, global pandemic. I'm a little head in a box on a screen. And so if I'm asked to reflect on, to imagine, or to dream, to conjure up a vision of the future of American Buddhism, I'm necessarily going to do that from where I'm at, right here in the present. And at present, the world's been shut down. And at the same time, there's social unrest everywhere, and everything we usually take for granted, all of our usual securities, both large and small, seem fragile, even failing. It's hard not to feel like we're at an inflection point, a turning point in history. There's a science fiction novelist named Kim Stanley Robinson who wrote in the New Yorker a couple of months ago about how he was on a rafting trip through the Grand Canyon when all of this started back in March. When he left for the trip, everything was fine. When he was on his trip, he was out of touch, no cell phone, no internet. And when he emerged from the Grand Canyon, the whole world had changed. And so he wrote, but the change that struck me seemed more abstract and internal. It was a change in the way we were looking at things. It is still ongoing. The virus is rewriting our imaginations. What felt impossible has become thinkable. We're getting a different sense of our place in history. We know we're entering a new world, a new era. We seem to be learning our way into a new structure of feeling. This change of feeling will require us to think creatively, to conjure up new visions of the future. And that includes new visions of American Buddhism. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to the beginning. Why did I say when I started this talk that I'm not a fan of this question? I'm not a fan of asking about the future of American Buddhism. I'm not a fan for a couple of reasons. One is just simply very practical. I'm not psychic. I can't actually see the future, so anything I might say about the future is only going to be a guess. No one saw 2020 coming, for example, so if you had asked me a year ago if Obon would be canceled, nobody would have believed me. I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but before I do, here's the second reason I'm not a fan of this question. It lacks specificity. There is no such thing as American Buddhism in the singular. There are a seemingly endless number of iterations of American Buddhisms in the plural. Everyone knows this. When we try to say something about American Buddhism, we're usually only talking about one, maybe two distinct traditions, one or two communities, one part of a much larger whole. From this point of view, what the future looks like for American Buddhism will depend entirely on what type of Buddhism you're talking about. American Tibetan Buddhism, that future will be shaped in part by what happens when the current Dalai Lama passes, how China reacts to his passing, and how the Tibetan diaspora reacts to China's reaction. Will that affect American Zen Buddhists? Sure, yes, absolutely. But also no, at least not the same way. Zen Buddhists will react in a different way. So rather than trying to account for everything, instead, I'm just going to talk about American Jodo Shinshu. What's the future look like for American Shin Buddhism? And again, I'm not psychic, so I can't really answer that question. I have no idea what the future looks like. But what I do know is this. The future, our imaginations and best guesses, our dreams and conjured visions of the future, those are made in the here and now. So we might not be able to talk about the future, but we can talk about the present. So a couple of other things. First, this question of what's the future look like isn't my favorite, like I've said. But another question a lot of my students ask me that also irritates me is how Buddhism is about cultural change. In my classes, we talk a lot about how Buddhism is changing as it moves from Asia to the West. And invariably, almost every semester, I'll get a student, usually some young guy who thinks he's very clever, who asks, well, didn't Buddhism change and it went from China to India? So like, why are we surprised that it's changing now? That question drives me crazy. First, I say, if you didn't want to know how Buddhism is changing as it moves from Asia to the West, why did you sign up for this course? It's like literally the description of the course. Secondly, unlike the past, the pace and spread of cultural movement and change is exponentially larger and faster now than it was when Buddhism first came to China. Third, and most importantly, we are not passive observers of history when it comes to Buddhism's movement from Asia to the West. We are active participants. Shin Buddhism has been in the United States for over a century. Yes, it's well established, but it's still changing. It's still developing. And other forms of Buddhism are still arriving in the West, changing the landscape for all other forms of Buddhism already established. It is not something happening back then in history or over there in Asia. It's something happening right here, right now, and we're involved. The choices we make, the things we do as Buddhists, change what Buddhism is in this country. In other words, and to get back to the future, we're making the future of American Buddhism right here, right now. So if we're going to dream up a vision of the future of American Shin Buddhism, we need to be honest about where we're at here in the present. And this is where things get challenging. We're living in extremely unprecedented times. We're all sitting at our devices right now, watching each other on screens. Many of us are isolated and starved for human contact. Others might be essential workers, which is this strange euphemism that somehow encapsulates both nurses and doctors, as well as people who work at grocery stores. Some of us are sick. Others are sick of injustice and are on the streets protesting, or being arrested without due process, or being killed. And meanwhile, the planet's still getting hotter. How can we speculate on the future when the future seems so uncertain? So I'm going to do something else a little bit weird. Just like I started off talking about Star Trek instead of Buddhism, now I'm going to talk about the past instead of the future. Most of my research and teaching actually involves the past. The project I'm working on right now, well, that is the project that I would be working on if it wasn't for this pandemic, is about the 1950s. It's about Buddhism after the camps. We all know the story of the camps, the illegal incarceration of Japanese Americans, of American citizens during World War II. This looms large in the collective memory of this community, in our collective memory. And we need to tell this story. We should tell this story. Other scholars like Duncan Williams are telling this story. And as important as it is, I'm also curious about what happens next. What happened after the camps? I'm especially curious about this question now because things seem so terrible right now. There's so much to worry about. There are so many things going on. But as an historian, I know that as awful as things seem right now, as unprecedented as the current pandemic feels, this is not the first time things have been awful. It's not the first time there's been social unrest or a pandemic. I want to be clear here. The current issues we're facing are in many ways unique. I'm not saying that we should be dismissive or unsympathetic to the challenges people are facing right now, especially because of some condescending reference to how things have always been bad. That's just patronizing. So that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that by looking to the past, we can get ideas and inspiration about how to move through and survive challenging times. In the days and weeks following December 7th, 1941, I know many Japanese Americans felt fear and uncertainty, and that their lives were never going to be the same, that they could lose everything. Many did lose everything. Life was, in most ways, never the same. And yet, the estimated total number of Buddhists actually increased in the camps, and by the mid-1950s, the BCA had an estimated membership of around 50,000 individuals, nearly 10,000 more than in the years leading up to World War II. So not only did the community survive the camps, it expanded rapidly after resettlement. How? How did that happen? I'm not going to answer that question. You're just going to have to wait till my next book. Actually, I think we know part of the answer already. This reestablishment of American Shin Buddhism after the camps happened because of a hell of a lot of work. If we were at the JSC right now, I would ask you all to go downstairs after this lecture and look at all those names of donors on the wall. Most of those names represent families whose parents or grandparents sacrificed everything after the war, not only for their kids, but for the Dharma. They conjured up a vision of what American Buddhism could be. They imagined something, some possibility of a future America, an America that had a place for Buddhism. The other thing I want to say here is that when we talk about the future of American Buddhism, when I talk about the future of American Shin Buddhism, I think we need to be clear that there's a difference between Shin Buddhism and the BCA, a difference between the Dharma and our temples. Now, don't get me wrong, there is something very, very important about the BCA. Our temples are very important, but we need to be clear about things. The BCA is an organization. A temple is a building or a community. Organizations and communities made by people, these things change. We like to say that the BCA is the oldest community of Buddhism in the United States, established way back in 1899, and that's true, sort of. The BCA wasn't established in 1899. The Buddhist Mission of North America was established in 1899, And that organization became the Buddhist Churches of America. It might seem pedantic to point this out, and it is, I'll admit that, but it's also a helpful reminder. Organizations change. We need to be open to that change, especially in times of crisis, like the crisis during World War II that prompted the BMNA to change its name in the first place. If we're going to make the future of American Shin Buddhism, then we need to be open to changing how we do things. We need to be open to new ideas about how to change our organizations. And we need to be fearless in this regard, because being attached to tradition, being attached to the way things have always been, when they haven't really always been that way, is both an attachment, something we're not supposed to have as Buddhists, right? And also a surefire way to be stuck in the past, incapable of conjuring up a vision of the future. Another example, the Temple Bazaar. Most temples these days have a bazaar during the summer, and the bazaar is different from Obon. When the Berkeley Temple started its bazaar, there were people who said, no way, this isn't Buddhist, we shouldn't do this. And they had other critiques, but Reverend and Mrs. Imamura recognized that they needed a way to raise money for the temple, so they did it anyway. Something similar is simmering on the horizon: temple membership. Membership is declining. It's the narrative of our time, regardless of the pandemic. To solve that problem, we need to think creatively. We need to think of other ways to support the Dharma, to support our communities, to support our ministers and teachers. Membership made sense in the past. It's not going to make sense in the future. We need to think past our past. We need to think of new ways to organize our communities, new ways to support and share the Dharma. Because that's the thing. There's a difference between organizations, the BCA, the temple, and so on, and Shin Buddhism, the teachings, the Dharma. So when we say, what's the future of American Buddhism? What are we talking about? Are we talking about the temples or the Dharma? You know, when Gene Roddenberry first dreamt up Star Trek, it was in the mid-1960s. It was at the height of the Cold War and the Civil Rights Movement. Things pretty much sucked. And yet Roddenberry had this vision of the future, a naive hope that we'd get out of the 20th century and not only start exploring the galaxy, but that we'd do it by overcoming our differences. In other words, when he conjured up a vision of the future, he projected both his concerns and misgivings about his present, as well as his hopes, as well as his belief in the fundamental goodness of humanity. Now, as Star Trek has grown and changed over time, it's gotten a lot more complicated. There are stories and subplots that speak to humanity's continued imperfections. Greed, hatred, and ignorance persist into the future. But nevertheless, humanity, we, all of us, get to this future utopia despite our limitations as a species, and sometimes even because of them. I say this because even though Star Trek has this utopian vision of the future, it's also pretty honest about humanity's limitations. This honest accounting of our limitations, of where we're at now in the present, is projected into that future. So, like I said before, if we're going to talk about the future of American Buddhism, we need to be honest about where we're at here in the present, honest about ourselves, about our limitations. And this is where we get to shine, especially as Shin Buddhists, because Shin Buddhism has a thing or two to say about human limitations. Like I said, there's a difference between the BCA and Shin Buddhism. Organizations, temples, communities, buildings, these are all human-created things. They can change readily and easily. And while we like to believe that the Dharma is eternal, our interpretations of the Dharma can change. We can focus on different aspects of the teachings for different times. We can plumb our history for what our ancestors did and how they thought about the Dharma during difficult times. And I'd like to highlight what is, for me, one of the most important, most unique, most useful aspects of Shin Buddhism, especially for our present moment. To put it plainly, everything is terrible, and that's okay. So remember, Shinran rejected the path of sages, the path of self-power practices. Why? There's a lot of potential reasons for this. His belief in Mappo, the declining age of the Dharma, his belief that we're all foolish beings, beset by evil karma, Alkunid and Bombu. Some might even say he wasn't talking about people in general, just people like himself, people who are incapable of self-power practices, but that doesn't mean others can't do them, just not Shinran, or me for that matter. All these interpretations are fine. Any of those ideas are okay. The bottom line though is this: everything is terrible. Whether it's just me or it's everyone, whether it's just some people or everyone who lacks the ability to progress along the path of sages by their own effort, however you want to spin it, we are incapable of becoming arhants. We are incapable of attaining nirvana by our own effort. and that's okay. The reason why I think this teaching is so important right now is because, in my view, it's a type of radical honesty. Shinran's upfront about this. I lack the ability to effect my own enlightenment, he says. In the Tani show, Yumian says that Shinran taught that if his karma were different, he'd be capable of murdering millions of people. Shinran's honest about his own shortcomings, his own failings. This is the historical moment we're living in right now. In order for us to realistically affect any sort of positive change in the world, whether it's the election or defending the police or doing the work of anti-racism or rebuilding our infrastructure and social safety nets or confronting climate catastrophe, we need to be radically honest with ourselves about these challenges, about their reality, about the difficulty of doing anything, about our own limitations, our limitations as individuals to confront them, to change them. We need to be honest in a way that we're not trained to be as Americans. As Americans, we've been told our whole lives that America is the greatest country on the planet. We've been told that we can do anything if we just work hard enough. And we've been told that our individual desires and wants are more important than the collective good. As a result, most of us remain blissfully ignorant about our interconnection to the world beyond our little bubbles. And this is a lie. If we're going to be serious about making our future, we need to be honest about that. Shin Buddhism forces us to be honest about who we are, about our limitations. This is what Shin Buddhism has to offer the world, what Shin Buddhism has to offer American Buddhism. You see, many of us have spent years, decades, trying to convince people how Shin Buddhism is just like regular Buddhism, going out of our way to point out its connections and continuities with Mahayana Buddhism, for example. Or we fret and we worry that people walk into our temples, look around and say, don't y'all meditate? And we worry that we don't, and we worry that maybe we should. But we don't need to worry. We need to tell people honestly, but compassionately, look, the world is on fire. Shin Buddhism teaches that we need to be honest about that. Everything is terrible, and that's okay. Why is that okay? Because it doesn't matter how terrible things are, whether we're talking about my own individual limitations or the world being on fire, no matter how terrible things we are all, each and every one of us, grasped by the compassion of the Buddha just as we are. A lot of conversations about Shin Buddhism at this point get sidetracked or even hijacked by people claiming that this statement, that we're all grasped by Amita's compassion just as we are, is a kind of fatalism, that it's a kind of blind faith, the belief that we don't need to do anything, or worse, that it's just a Buddhist version of Christianity, or even worse than that we should be disengaged from politics or social issues. And that's not how I see it. Don't let the conversation get hijacked. I see this universal compassion of the Buddha as both a statement of the reality of the world and as an inspiration or an aspirational desire for how the world should be. As a statement of the reality of the world, what I mean is that if the Buddha's compassion embraces everyone, then everyone is interconnected. We're all related to one another in some sense. This usually gets spun in purely Buddhist or spiritual terms. We're all participating in the true nature of reality. We're all gems in Indra's jeweled net, etc. And that's great. That vision of reality can be really positive, and if it helps people, great, run with it, cool. But to my mind, it's also a statement on our literal interconnectivity. At this moment in history, when the whole world was shut down by a virus, I think we can easily see how we're all literally interconnected, even if you're a devout atheist and you don't give a damn about any of this religious or spiritual stuff. This is a truth. This is a fact. I don't spend a lot of my day thinking about the exotic animal trade on the other side of the planet, but that doesn't mean it doesn't affect me. We need to be honest about how we're all interconnected on this planet if we're going to realistically confront climate change. And if we're honest, if we don't confront climate change, there's no future for American Buddhism. So when I say that the compassion of Amida embraces everyone as a statement of the reality of the world, I mean that we're all intertwined, interwoven, interconnected, that this is just how things are. At the same time, this is also an inspirational or aspirational statement, or as the saying goes, this is the Buddha's wish for the world. When we say Amida's compassion embraces all of us just as we are, this is a desire for how the world should be. The compassion of the Buddha embraces all beings without distinction. This is radical love. This is the idea that we should all, each of us, treat other sentient beings with a sense of compassionate care. This is a conjuring up of a world not as it is, remember everything's terrible, but the world as it ought to be. This is the work of the imagination. This is the conjuring up of a vision of the future, a vision of the world as it should be, based on an honest account of the world as it is. This is an awareness of our limitations here in the present, but also a vain hope that we can create a better future. And this is where the cynics and the critics say, hold up, Shin Buddhism is fatalistic. You're not supposed to do anything. Or they say, Shinran says we can't do good because of our karma, or any other number of dismissals. And the answer is always the same. No, the critics and cynics have missed the point. The compassion of the Buddha is aspirational. It's not a vision of the world as it is, but a vision of the world as it could be. It's an inspiration for how I should be, how I should behave, how I should treat others. Now, keep in mind, we're still being honest. We're still acknowledging that everything's terrible. So we need to acknowledge that we'll make mistakes, that while I'm aspiring to be filled with universal compassion, I'm going to screw up. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to get it wrong, and that's okay. Trying and failing is always better than not trying at all. Acknowledging the limits of the world, the limits of sentient beings, is Jodo Shinshu's bread and butter. This is the bedrock of Shinran's teachings. Everything is terrible, and that's okay. We got this. Together is the only way forward, because the compassion of the Buddha embraces all beings without distinction, just as we are. The future of American Buddhism is what we make of it. We are making it right now. In every choice and every action, we plant the karmic seeds that will ripen future causes and conditions. Let's double down on Shin Buddhism's teaching. Let's remind the world that greed, hatred, and ignorance are the root causes of the terribleness of everything. And the way forward is a narrow path, a path between rivers of fire and water toward the compassion of the Buddha. That's all I got today. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Scott Mitchell. We really appreciate your presentation this morning. I think at this time, Dr. Mitchell, do you have a few moments to maybe answer some people's questions if they have any questions?
I've got hours of time.
Wonderful.
I'm happy to answer questions. I actually prefer dialogue. So
that's wonderful.
Just me talking at
Great. we have replicators that can replicate time, so we have unlimited time. But so at this time, everyone, we would like to invite you all to please turn your cameras back on. I'm going to turn my light back on here. I'm disappearing in the background, but. Yeah, so please go ahead and feel free to turn your cameras on, and you can unmute your microphone. And I can't see everybody, so hopefully this will work out. But if you had a question, you're more than welcome to just kind of chime in, and I'm sure Dr. Mitchell will be happy to answer some of your questions.
Yes, I got a question. Dr. Mitchell, first I just want to express my great appreciation to the fact that you are obviously history oriented. I am also, and when you do get to publish something about Shin Buddhism in the 1950s, I'm going to lap it up. I'm waiting for it. Okay, so I appreciate that very much. I don't know. This is less a question than another observation. I remember seeing the original Star Trek series, at least a few episodes worth of it, and the thought that was with me at that time, this was before I encountered Shinran's teaching, those stories were all classic morality plays. And I thought this is what was so powerful about them. I just wanted to throw that out because I think you put another dimension into considering Star Trek, that yeah, it's aspirational. It's kind of aspirational storytelling. So I keep groping for how I can talk about Shin Buddhism to other people, and a lot of what you talked about is what I think I've already recognized. But I also was thinking about what you just said, that yeah, you're getting these questions and they don't make any sense. Would I be correct in saying that basically what you're trying to do is to get people to break away from those questions and think about things in another way?
Thank you, George, and thank you for the first question being about Star Trek. That makes me happy. Yeah, in part. I mean, part of what I think is, you know, nobody can really predict the future. All we're really doing is looking at what we're doing now. and sort of playing out scenarios, right? But that also means that really what we're doing right now is creating the future, and that's what I hope people understand, is that we can speculate on the future if we want, but we're making it. The things that we're doing right now have consequences in the future. And so another way of saying this is, rather than saying what do we think the future will look like, would be saying what do I want the future to look like, and how can I make that happen.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, great talk, Scott. I really enjoyed that, and the fact that you're really honest about Shin Buddhists and how we should look at the Dharma, the churches, the BCA, and so forth, that there is a distinct separation between the two. And I think as Shin Buddhists, we don't see that. Like you said, we like to see things our way. And so I just want to say thank you for this talk. It really should open our eyes as Shin Buddhists and how we should approach the Dharma and approach the organization side of it.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I also don't want to give the impression that I think there's a distinct total separation, right? We need the Dharma might exist in some sort of abstract sense as a universal law like gravity, whether or not there's people around. But in order for us to share the Dharma, we actually need an organization. One of the questions that Yumi sent to me yesterday from one of the participants, I'm not sure if they're here or not, but was a question about whether we would need buildings in the future. I'm paraphrasing that question. I'm misrepresenting it, so I apologize. But of course, we'll need buildings in the future. The question is what kind of buildings or what kinds of communities do we want to invest in order to best support the sharing of the Dharma, I guess is a way to put it. Yeah. Thank you, Michael.
Thank
I hope
you.
you're doing well, by the way.
Yeah. Do you like my new haircut?
Yeah.
I kind of look like you now.
I'm a trendsetter, apparently.
So in terms of the future, we have the benefit, for example, in the context of the pandemic, to have this Zoom capability. Other things, I wonder how you feel about using them. And it didn't click for me until I saw you, Scott, but that you co-host that Dharma Realm podcast. And I wonder what the plans are for that into the future in terms of being a regular vehicle for getting concepts out and exposing people on a broader basis beyond the buildings to the Shin Buddhist tradition.
Mm-hmm. So thank you. My co-host Terry Bridge and I, early in the pandemic, had this brilliant idea that we would have lots of time to record and really devote to that. And so just people know, the Dharma Realm podcast is something that Reverend Bridge and I dreamt up by ourselves. We're not, it's not like an official BCA thing or an official Institute of Buddhist Studies thing. It's just sort of our little pet project, which is why it's easily sidetracked. Even though Harry and I had lots of plans to do something with that over the summer, as people who follow that podcast might have noticed, we haven't done anything.
Yes, take a pitch. That can be a very useful modality for folks that are far flung.
I hear that. One of the challenges for us has been the time issue and balancing multiple things. So in addition to that hobby, basically, I have this full-time job of trying to run the Institute of Buddhist Studies.
Okay.
Which actually pays the bills, right? So balancing different things is one of the challenges that I think we've discovered. But as far as to put that into the context of a larger organization, this is where organizations and communities come in handy, right? Because the BCA or your temple or the Institute of Buddhist Studies, that's not just an individual pet project. That's that's a group of people who have the time, and they can share their resources and they can share their work in order to make things, whether it's this particular thing that I'm doing right now or a podcast or something else, possible. So yeah. Koichi, should we be, somebody raised their hand. Should I call on them? Do you have a,
that would be great, actually. Yeah, I'm trying to take a look at the chat as well. So yeah, if you're able to look at the chat box and address those questions, that would be wonderful.
Sure.
Hi,
Well,
I raised my hand. Hi,
Great.
Kathy.
Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, that was very interesting. You brought up some things to think about. And one of the things you brought up in terms of the Dharma, differentiating the Dharma between the BCA and organization and communities, is the idea for the Dharma that the interpretation of the Dharma changes, or aspects of the Dharma that gets emphasized. I think that's what you said. Is that what you said? And do you have some examples for that? Some historical, or is this just ideas for the future?
Yeah, so this is something that I think we don't think about very much. That we tend to think of the Dharma as being, like I said, that it's like gravity, right? It's this thing that exists without people. But people are still people, and they interpret things differently. Or another way of saying that is that they might focus on different things in different ways. So one thing that comes to my mind is I think that Jessica Main is on the call, and there might be some other scholars of Japanese Buddhism in the room who would know more about this than I would. But it seems to me that in the modern period, particularly in the United States, the biography of Shinran becomes somewhat more emphasized than the orthodox interpretation of his teachings. And by orthodox, I mean the way in which Renmyo kind of sets the stage for that in medieval Japan or pre-modern Japan. And when I say that the biography of the Buddha becomes important, particularly in the modern period, and particularly in America, I'm talking about the way in which we talk about Shinran being sort of this man of the people, this person who, when he was exiled, he was working with peasants and the lower classes. And we focus on him being married and sort of being a family man. And I think we could, as a historian, we could speculate on why those aspects of Shinran's life have become important in a particular historical time or place. The facts of his life haven't changed, right? The facts of his life are the same because they're historical facts. But the tradition, people, focus on one aspect of his life versus another aspect of his life. And that's one of the ways in which I think that we can talk about things changing, or how we can focus on different aspects of his teachings. Renyo is another good case in point, where Renyo has his particular interpretation of Shinran's teachings, and then those get sort of codified, right, moving forward. So, and now, fortunately, I see both Jeff Wilson and Jessica Main are commenting, and so I'm going to let one of them answer part of that question, because I'm very curious to know their take on my hot take on that. Jessica, are you there?
Your hot take is exactly right. The stress on Shinran as an ordinary human being like us, who faced tremendous difficulty during his life, and a stress on the way that he was anti-corrupt authority, that he too struggled with discrimination and things like that. So these are aspects of his biography that get really stressed and that really drew people.
Right. So it's not so much that we've changed anything, it's just that there's been a change of focus, right? And so that's kind of what I'm pointing to, is that I also feel as though there's been this tendency, like I sort of hinted at this in my talk, there was this tendency over the last, 30, 40 years of trying to place Shin Buddhism within the sort of larger historical doctrinal lineage of Mahayana Buddhism more generally, and that's absolutely true. Shin Buddhism only makes sense if you put it into the context of the broader Buddhist tradition. But that also tends to de-emphasize some of the unique contributions that Shin Buddhism has made. And I think that that tendency to say, oh, Shin Buddhism is just part of Mahayana Buddhism, then de-emphasizes what makes it unique. And then it just sort of begs the question, well, you know, why be Shin Buddhist versus Zen Buddhist or whatever? You know, if it's all kind of the same thing, then it's all the same thing. So what is it that makes Shin Buddhism unique? And I gave you some of the things that I think makes my own take on what I think Shin Buddhism has to offer. So Jeff, did you want to jump into? Or should I just read your, oh, yeah.
Sorry, I was just, there, it took me a moment. Oh, I have so much I could say. I do fear to turn this whole talk into three academic. So perhaps I'll save any comment, maybe at the end if we.
I'd like to comment on something right now, Dr. Mitchell, if it's okay. You mentioned Daniel, and I think what I can anticipate is that people need to rediscover what this man really represented. He was a tremendous, I'll use the word, evangelist. He was capable of taking ideas that were sophisticated and make them compelling to ordinary people. I think.
You mean? I'm sorry. You mean Renyo?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, okay. I'm getting to the point of holding a brief for this man. I find him being condemned for things that he actually didn't do. You know, he didn't conjure up all this orthodoxy about himself. That was done later, and that's just part of the story. But again, he took Shinran's teaching and brought it to the lives of people in medieval Japan. It was a tremendous thing that he did. We wouldn't be here without that. Yeah. So, and I'm also a historian. All history is cautionary. Daniel did, in fact, set in motion something that created what, remember, Reverend Emeritus Mons Kodani called this great Catholic Church that we have now in Japan today. But I see that as something which can resonate with us here in America.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a Renyo scholar, so I don't want to speculate too much. But I agree that, you know, this is another thing that I'm trying to convey is that, you know, the organization that Renyo helped create or that followed him allowed for the continuation of the teachings and the spread of the Dharma. And we can look to that as, you know, I think we should be honest about the positives and negatives and all that other stuff. But yeah, I mean, you know, if it wasn't for that, then we certainly wouldn't be here. I see another question from.
I have a question
from,
if that's okay.
Yeah, Rick, go ahead.
I really appreciate your talk. I found it very provocative, and I agree that it's important to understand in an historical context how we got where we are today. And I wondered what your reaction is to a historical theory that I've heard Dr. Lancaster talk about. There was a very famous talk in 1967 by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King espousing the same theory. And it's a theory of how immigrant groups in the United States became stronger. And the paradoxical theory, as I understand it, is that as the Irish and the Jewish and the Japanese Americans were put upon and discriminated against in horrible ways, they turned inward, and their cultural institutions, their religious institutions became stronger. And Dr. Lancaster talked at one point about the decrease in membership in BCA, for example, a steady increase over 70 years. And he explains that as the disappearance, slowly, of discrimination. And as that discrimination disappears little by little, there's no longer a reason to maintain the strength and the vitality of our institutions. And I wondered if you had given any thought to that, or what you think about that kind of theory and how it plays out today.
You've put me on the spot, Rick. I'm not totally familiar with Dr. King's speech or Professor Lancaster's take on that. So my reaction right now would be completely spontaneous, and whatever I say might be the reason why I tell CB not to put this on the internet. Depending on how wrong I get it. Depending on how wrong I am. I find that the way that you've described it sounds too easy to me. And I'm always wary of explanations of complex social and historical events, especially over the course of what we're talking about, a century here. I find, sort of simple, easy explanations to be usually pretty lacking. My initial reaction is, I don't really see that there's been a decrease in racism in this country, either generally or specifically against Asian Americans or Japanese Americans. And so that right there tells me that there's something lacking with that analysis. The other thing that I find a little bit troubling is yes, in some ways, other immigrant communities from Europe became, as you said, sort of retreated into sort of solidifying their ethnic identity in the face of racism. At the same time, those immigrant groups were eventually allowed to be included within this broader category of white people in a way that Japanese Americans and Asian Americans have not been. And so I think if we're honest about that, we need to look at the complex nature of racial and ethnic and religious belonging in this country. Again, Duncan Williams' work in American Sutras is, I think, really important in this regard, and the way in which these discourses get played out. My opinion has been for a long time that the real problem with the decline in membership in the BCA has very little to do with external factors and everything to do with economics, and that people just don't have the money that they used to, quite frankly. And so that combined with a general decline in Americans joining things more generally, I think is a better explanation for the decline. And then you can account for that decline in membership without having to sort of, make connections to larger social forces, which I think are far more complicated. That's my hot take.
Give me just one follow-up. Then you've heard Dr. Lancaster's speech. I think you were there a few years ago when it was played virtually in Arizona.
Yeah.
Do you agree with his optimistic view of where Shin Buddhists are in the United States today? Is that something that you agree with?
I don't know if I would agree or disagree. Optimism is optimism to me isn't an argument. It's a feeling.
Yeah.
And I appreciate, I appreciate people being optimistic. Absolutely. I like to be optimistic myself. I tend to be a bit, more cynical in my day-to-day life. But I think that the spirit of Dr. Lancaster's is his talk back in, I think it was in Arizona when we broadcast that, was I think well taken. And I think that the bigger sort of historical point that he was trying to make was the context of his comments were that for a good 2,000 years, even though Buddhism spread across almost the entirety of Asia, it was still sort of contained within Asia. It didn't go beyond what we think of as the Asian continent. And it wasn't until Jero Shinshu Buddhists established the Buddhist mission in North America that a successful sort of, missionary movement was made. outside of that historical context. That to me is a very compelling idea. And I think that you could, you know, I think, you know, from an academic point of view, I could, you know, do some research and theorize and talk about that for days. But I do see how that could be thought of as optimistic, right? Because basically what he's saying is that for all of Buddhism's success in Asia, it was still sort of bounded within this one geographic region, albeit the largest geographic region on the planet. And it didn't really leave until Jodo Shinshu Buddhists were able to do that. That I think would be a good cause for this community, for pride, right? For hopefulness. Again, I think I could probably look at that from a lot of different angles and talk about modernity and globalization, and these are other factors, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, I will leave with the optimistic note, in part because I have a deep amount of respect for Professor Lancaster. He was actually my advisor's advisor, so he's sort of my academic grandfather. So I always want to be a little bit deferential in my own academic lineage, so to speak.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott.
Dr. Mitchell, if I could follow up a little bit on these thoughts.
Okay.
Yes, so with Jodo Shinshu's basis or heritage from Japan, it's when it came over to the U.S., it was always mixed in with community. You know, it was part of the community, and in fact, it was sometimes hard to differentiate what was Jodo Shinshu and what was Japanese American. You know, in terms of why we were doing things, why we had a history of doing something in the temple, and so on. And as we've talked about how we survive and how we expand, we've talked about needing to go beyond the Japanese American community to really see members come in from other walks of life. And I just wonder sometimes if, with the deep roots from the Japanese culture, if the heritage is an existential threat or an existential opportunity for Jodo Shinshu in America relative to how we move forward and how we sort of escape is a word that comes to my mind, escape the Japanese American community or break that barrier. I don't know whether we're walking out into the greater community or we're asking them to walk into the Japanese American community. You have any thoughts about the intertwining of that?
Yes, I have some thoughts. You know, I think that this is, Rick mentioned the talk with Professor Lancaster, and that was at the BCA National Council in Arizona, and at the same symposium I gave a talk, and my talk then was mostly about narratives and about, you know, sort of stories that we tell about different communities and how those narratives become sort of taken for granted as true. And I think that what you're pointing to, Michael, is also a narrative that we talk about within American Jodo Shinshu. This narrative that the community was and always is Japanese, and it's somehow, you know, connected to this idea of Japaneseness or Japanese Americanness. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. But I think that we also need to recognize that there's also a lot of there's some other work being done within that narrative that obscures different parts of the history and obscures a significant amount of the current reality. So, for example, if we're going to say that there's something unique and inherently Japanese about Jodo Shinshu Buddhism in this country, then I find that just to be sort of really out of touch with the fact that so far, with one or two exceptions, all the people who have spoken have been white. Let's just call a spade, right? You know, all of the people who are in this of the 70 some people in this chat right now, you know, many people in this room are Japanese Americans, but the ones who are monopolizing the conversation are the white guys. So the fact of the matter is that the community is not uniformly Japanese American at present. I would also say, from a historical point of view, that's also been true, that the community has always had some interaction with the non-Japanese American community, that's been part of the community, going back to the beginning. Another, I think, narrative that sort of gets weaved into this is this sense that before World War II, the Japanese American community, the Jodo Shinshu Buddhist community was primarily interested in serving the needs of the Japanese American community. And I think this sort of gets woven into this sense of, we're just here trying to work and earn a living and not bother anybody. And then, we all get into, into trouble, etc. But and then we often will talk about how the two ministers who came from who were sent from Honganji in 1899, they were sent here to minister to the Japanese American community, and we have this article from the San Francisco Chronicle that's totally inflammatory, and it says all these scary things like these ministers are here to convert us white people to Buddhism. And we usually talk about that as like, oh, this is clearly, hysteria. This is white racist hysteria. And it is, it absolutely is. I'm not saying that it's not, it's absolutely hysteria, it's white racial hysteria. At the same time, it's the Buddhist mission of North America. I think we have to be honest about the fact that those two ministers were also coming here to missionize. They were coming here to proselytize. There were explicit, they had this desire to actually spread the Dharma beyond the Japanese American community. Now, I don't want to get too lost in the weeds about the historical background of all of that, but I do think that part of the mission of the Buddhist mission of North America was to spread the Dharma beyond the Japanese community. And so I think that's also part of our heritage that we should acknowledge, that it's not just that this community has been by and for Japanese Americans, but it also has this part of its past. Now, having said all of that, what I said a little while ago was, when I think it was Kathy, you asked that question, Rick's question about the decline of racism in this country. Racism hasn't gone away, right? I think we need to acknowledge that there's still tons of racism directed specifically at Asian Americans, and that's a good reason to maintain a particular kind of organization where a minority who's at the receiving end of racism can feel safe. And I don't have a problem with that. I think that's totally fine. And so I think that the answer to your question, Michael, is that things are complicated. Things are really complicated. And what I worry about is when we get too lost in the weeds of trying to tease out what's really Buddhist and what's just cultural stuff within the tradition. Because to my view, that is a sort of a false dichotomy. I think that there's a false dichotomy between the real religion and the cultural stuff. You can't have religion without culture. You just can't. Religion is expressed through culture. That's how religion works, through its cultural expressions. And so I think that the deeper question that the community needs to have is, what do we want the future to look like? What do we want our community to look like? And this is a question that I don't think that I should answer because I'm too old, quite frankly. And I'm not that old. But I still think that I'm too old. I think that the real answer to this question of what do we want this future to look like should be answered by the Young Buddhist Association. And I know that Funi's talk next week is going to touch on some of this stuff about what younger Buddhists are doing right now, because really what the younger Buddhists are doing right now, they're the ones who are going to make the future. And this question that we have of worrying about this sort of this split or identity between culture and religion and Japanese American or white American, I would be really curious to hear from them, their thoughts on this question, because they're the ones who are going to live it, right? I saw this morning on Twitter that Generation X, which is my generation, we are culturally irrelevant. I'm totally fine with that. Let somebody else do the work. So that's
Shirley has a question.
Well, I don't have a question. I just want to say I'm not a scholar, so I'm just a regular person. But I was going to say culturally, as like the Japanese Americans intermarry, so it's going out to different cultures, so it's expanding, and the makeup of the temples are also changing. And I think that's a good thing. And so by the Japanese intermarrying, so other cultures are coming in. There's still the remnant, a lot of remnants of the Japanese community, but like at our temple, we're trying to make a lot of the stuff translated into English and having more English songs so that the other cultures can feel more comfortable. And so, and also like Einstein said, Buddhism would be like the religion of the future. And I think because the teachings are true, and that will attract other people and cultures. And I think that's, you know, as you were saying, it's needed to expand it in order to grow like the churches, the temples, membership, to expand it to actually include all people that are interested in it.
Thank you very much.
Scott,
Where,
did
where
you look at chat? There's Yumi put a question in there.
Yeah, and I also saw that Jesse had a question.
Oh,
Did
okay.
I answer that one first?
Sure.
Jesse, did you have a question?
Yes, Dean Mitchell. Yeah, I do agree with Shirley about optimism you were talking about, but I have this thought that optimism is more than a feeling. Like the Japanese say, ikigai. You know, it's the reason we get up in the morning. You know, I think that as an IBS student, you know, working on my thesis, I'm looking at the core of Shinran's teaching. And he said he was burdened by karma from the beginningless past. You know, I noticed that you had a statue of Amida looking back. You know, of course, that, you know, right away that, you know, Back to the Future came to my mind, you know, and, you know, when we look back at Buddhism, you know, we see a lot of things that are missing, you know, the temple, rituals, of course, worship, you know, but what he talked about was about repentance, you know, going back to John and Bodhidharma, you know, confession was a big part of it. And Shinran did talk about repentance, which you don't hear about now. I know me coming from, you know, Catholic school education, you know, why don't they, I mean, in a way, you know, burdened by karma, you aren't talking about repentance there. You know, when you think about it, not what you've done, but, you know, what we've done. You know, the reason why we're here is the sins of our fathers, and we try to deny that. You know, well, my father didn't have slaves. My grandfather didn't, you know, do this or that. And, you know, I never killed anybody. But in a way we have. And that's what I think that we have to repent. And it's something that I think that Shinran would talk about, but we don't mention it.
That's a really interesting, Jesse. You know, I spent a good amount of time when I was in graduate school studying the Sixth Patriarch Sutra, which explicitly refers to a repentance ceremony within a Chinese Chan context. And my recollection of that is that the repentance ceremony within that context is within a particular, the reason you have the repentance ceremony is to confess your sins, so to speak, or your transgressions within your monastic community. And so I think it's rather important to understand the difference between admitting your failings within a community and the sort of idea of repenting your sins to God in a Christian or Catholic context. I think they're very, very different. And the reason why is because, again, it's a monastic community. The repentance ceremony that's detailed in the Sixth Patriarch Sutra is specifically for a monastic community. So what happens is that a monk goes to all of the other people in that community and says, I did not do the things that I'm supposed to do, or I violated one of the monastic precepts. And so it's a very specific acknowledgement of wrongdoing, of some agreed upon rules, and then the monk has to suffer the consequences of not following those rules. Now, I say all of this because I think what's missing in the way that we might think about sin or repentance is that human context of being part of a community. And this, I think, is where I think this is where we might be able to move the conversation to some of the things you're talking about in terms of current issues and current problems with the world. You know, when we talk about reparations, for example, for past wrongdoing that the government did, this is an acknowledgement that our community has made a mistake and our community needs to deal with it, even if it happened in the past, right? So I know in Canada, there's this whole program that I'm gonna get totally wrong, and Jessica's gonna cringe, but it's about the acknowledgement of the wrongdoing that the Canadian government did vis-a-vis the First Nations people over the course of the last, you know, couple of 100,000 years or whatever. And so this is an acknowledgement of a wrongdoing by a particular community to a particular group of people. Regardless of its historical immediacy or if it happened in the past. And so I think this is part of what's missing of our conversations today. And this is this thing that I was mentioning before. As Americans, we don't think about ourselves in that way. We don't think of ourselves as part of a community. We think of ourselves as individuals. The individual right becomes the most important thing. And it doesn't matter if my individual action has some negative consequence on you. What matters is that my individual rights are not stopped, right? So you can think of the most obvious example that should come to our minds right now are the people who refuse to wear masks in public because they feel as though their rights are being taken away, and they don't care that they're potentially hurting other people, right? The individual becomes more important. So if we're going to talk about repentance, or we're going to talk about solving these kinds of problems, I think we need to begin by acknowledging our interconnection as part of a community. That this is a bad thing that happened in our community, and that needs to be addressed, regardless of any one individual feeling or thought. Lots of other questions are coming in, I think. Yumi, you had a question? Or are you just sending me questions?
That came in on the registration form. I just wanted to be sure that you saw them since they were sent in early.
I have a question, Scott.
Okay.
Do you feel America is ready for Shin Buddhist and the honesty that's behind it, of actually looking at ourselves and saying that, yes, I'm a foolish being. I have greed, anger, and ignorance. I need to address those pieces of it, in which Shin Buddhist has actually helped me see my real self. Do you feel America is actually ready for that? Because our upbringing doesn't say, oh, you're a bad person, you're a great person, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Everything is good, good, good. And the fact of actually looking into our real selves and addressing that, do you feel America is actually ready for that?
You know, Rick mentioned optimism. If I'm being honest, no, I don't think most people are ready for that. But then again, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about it, right? You know, I think most people, aren't really ready to face the truth or face reality. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have that conversation or shouldn't try. You know, those are two different things, right? Another way to think about this would be to say that, you know, I think that there are lots of different kinds of Buddhisms for a reason, and that the kind of Buddhism that works for some people doesn't work for others, because even though we're all interconnected, we all have our own unique karmic experiences that need to be addressed in different ways. And so, you know, this particular teaching of our limitations has resonated with me, but I don't expect that it would resonate with everybody, or that it would be the thing that somebody else needs to hear. Does that make sense? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, you know, Kathleen Sakamoto. Oh, the statue. That's probably one of my favorite Buddha statues. It's that picture is actually from when the statue was in a museum, but it's currently in a temple in Kyoto, in a Jodoshu temple in Kyoto, and the name is totally going to escape me. But it's the name of the statue is Amida looking back. It's a rather famous statue of Amida looking over his shoulder because he's guiding us, to the Pure Land, and he wants to make sure no one is left behind. Is sort of the general take of it. I'm going to guess that somebody can send that via chat to everybody what the actual Japanese name of that statue is.
A Kondo, I believe.
The temple or the name of the statue?
I thought that was the name. I know that's a weird name for top. The word that comes to mind.
Kondo, yes.
Kondo.
Yeah, Blaine Higa. Hi, Blaine. And Reverend Hirano. Yeah, Mikeri Amida Kondo. Yeah, I knew it had Mikeri, which I'm mispronouncing, of course.
Thank you. It's really a beautiful statue.
Yeah, last summer I was actually in Kyoto, and I was really happy to actually be able to go to that temple and see it. It's much smaller than I imagined, and you can't take pictures of it. But it was still a wonderful experience. Keisuke, did you have a question?
Yes. Thank you for bringing up the cultural influence and the religion. So that is, I think it's I'm thinking it's personally. So it's already Shin Buddhism and Pure Land Buddhism or Dodo Shinshu. It's kind of so the different paths is already going because I think it's based on the history. So it's telling the Nagasaki group and the Issei immigration didn't have a strong influence in Sango Wakuran, and also the Japanese American community didn't experience in the Meiji resolutions, and also afterwards, consequently, happening Shinto Buddhism separation and Haibutsu Kishaku. It's not affecting directly to that Pure Land Buddhism group. So that is I'm thinking that's made us a little bit different perspective in the Pure Land Buddhism, and I don't think it's either one is right or wrong. Just the differentiations of the historical experience that is resulted in our perspective in self power and the other powers. So, and I honestly don't like it that Sango Wakuran's the result is in the government decision rather than theological discussions that concluded that which is supposed to be our orthodox is seeing the body and mind, the words needed to follow the Amitabha Buddha's wisdom and compassion, or just appreciating it. Nembutsu I think is believing. I honestly feeling is that we needed to bring it up again in American Buddhism context because I think it might be related with it's a kind of a topic is going around. I'm believing that is related to declining in the memberships. Also, I honestly feeling that a lot of talking in the American Buddhist practitioner at the hospital situation, and they're focusing on what kind of practice are you doing, and so many questions, this kind of questions coming up. So how to say, the practice-based Buddhism is a practice-based perspective to the Buddhism. What we are doing, what you are doing, that is kind of missing part is Shinkui, the body, mind, words, and the mind and word part. So that means I sometimes feeling something is we missed from the back the 19th century, so that what we experience in the religious group. So that is the kind of the broader question or some opinion, but is that's my feeling. So this is my question is basically how do we how to say how American Buddhism can bring back the historical experience to the modern world. So now is the kind of unsolved question about theological in the 19th century, including Sango Wakuran is I think it's a the significant turning point as a Pure Land Buddhism is we are doing the action to the world or just we are receiving the appreciation. So that is a kind of self-power and other powers that argument is not solved yet on my perspective. Sorry, it's kind of broad question. Yeah. So yeah, because I remember you said the hijacks logical, the kind of hijacking in the logic that we are not very kind of tend to be judge the other Buddhist school is we are very passive Buddhism, but it's not true. So because when we are seeing the historical context, so that's why I am bringing up. So should we recreate or how to say bringing up that argument in this modern times in America?
That's a really interesting question, Cascade, and I don't think I have a good answer. And it sounds like you're asking, should we revisit a 150-year-old debate and make it relevant today?
Yeah.
So on the one hand, yeah, sure, why not? But I also heard in your question there that you were talking about, and I know that you do work as a chaplain and you go to hospitals and you're talking to people in those spaces as well. And I think that the other thing to keep in mind is that there's no one answer to these questions. There's no one thing that we should always be doing. But that we should be attentive to the contexts within which we're having conversations and with whom. So I would love for you and I to sit down and talk about Sankodakan and really get into all of that and talk about what that is, the history, what the consequences were, how we might talk about it in a modern context. That would be fantastic. And I'm sure that would be a conversation that would bore half of the people who are here right now, or they would have no idea what we're talking about, because it's either something they've never heard of or something that is just not interesting to them. And that's totally fine. I can also see that in the context of doing hospital chaplaincy, that people are not concerned about, some historical event as much as they are concerned about something much more immediate, right? And so I think that the important thing to do is to always be mindful of where you are, the context within which you're speaking to people in order to meet them where they're at, rather than coming into those situations with this sense of, we've never talked about this thing, and if we just talked about this thing, we'd be able to fix all these problems. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So oftentimes I think that, and this is something that I've struggled with for a long time, when meeting people who have questions about Jodo Shinshu, and they ask, so what's the practice? The historian in me or the academic in me wants to do this long-winded, historical explanation or theological explanation of what other power is and blah, 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 blah. I think people just really want to know, how I spend my afternoon, right? Like what I actually do. And, and from a certain point of view, we can get into the complexity of, who's saying the name. When I recite Namo Amida Butsu, who's saying the name? Is it me? Is that coming from somewhere else? And we can talk about all of the complexities of that question in some contexts. But I think 9 times out of 10, when people say, what's your practice? The answer is real simple: chanting. It's not much more complicated than that, for the reason that they're asking. They're not asking all these other questions. They're just asking a very simple question. And so that's the tricky part, right? Figuring out your audience and figuring out what it is that they want to know. That's the Bodhisattva skill, right?
I'm not explaining or I'm providing lecture to the patients and patients' family or staff, and never I dance. But internally, I'm always struggling. It's when I'm saying chanting, but when we are singing in the temple, so without the ministers leading in Namo Amitabha 3 times, no one say the Amitabha's name. So what I think is yes, couple the people is spontaneously is naming the Amitabha's name. That is I would like to have, so because that is not necessary to be led by someone. So that is and sometimes very quiet. Our temple is very quiet so during chanting or during talk. That is, I think is that my concern is we are practicing chanting, but we not sure. So I'm also personally not sure. Is it truly chanting is our practice? That is my question. So if I'm experiencing a very quiet temple gathering, so that is.
Yeah, well, I say chanting just because that's a short, easy answer. It's not necessarily the answer. And I also, I say this in part because I spent a lot of time researching this 20 years ago about sort of the orthodox perspective of Jodo Shinshu, and how because of self-power, other power, you can do whatever you want, but it's not going to affect your enlightenment, that kind of thing. But from a sort of anthropological point of view, even if nobody in the temple is chanting except for the priest, you might say that everybody being there together is the practice, or you might say that that's still the practice because the priest is doing it. Or you might also say that the sort of deeper practice within Jodo Shinshu is hearing the Dharma. Would be another way of putting that. So if hearing the Dharma is the practice, then it doesn't matter whether or not you chant. What matters is you hear the Dharma.
Yeah.
And so who's chanting is not relevant. So that might be another way to sort of simplistically answer the question. And of course, each of those answers has layers and layers and layers of caveats and what about and exceptions. But that's really great. I do want to jump back to the thread. I see there's lots of people sending messages about the temple that I mentioned, and there is a question about the tension in certain sanghas between people who actively use the Dharma to inform and advance social justice activism versus others who insist the temple should remain apolitical. This is a really good question. I completely have no good answer to that question. I wish I did, but I think that that's also one way I might begin to answer that question is to acknowledge again that there's different kinds of Buddhisms or different interpretations of the Dharma or different aspects of the Dharma that can inform our lives as individuals in different ways. And one of the things, I think that both sides of this equation are mistaken in believing that you should always do one thing or the other, right? So somebody who says that the Dharma is necessarily and always connected to social activism is one extreme, and the person who says the Dharma is never connected to politics or social justice or should be apolitical is another extreme. Those are extreme viewpoints, and I would therefore say that that's probably incorrect, and that the reality is somewhere in between. That there are times when the Dharma can inform us politically, and there are times when it can't. So, for example, there's all kinds of Buddhist sutras, Buddhist scriptures, in many different Buddhist canonical languages, such as the Buddha's advice to kings, the Vajrayana or tantric texts in Central and East Asia that have explicit rituals for how to protect the government from invasion, all of these kinds of things, to suggest that the Dharma has no connection to social or political issues is just historically inaccurate. The Buddha clearly talked to kings, he had advice for them. So that's certainly part of the tradition. But I wouldn't say that necessarily has to affect or has to inform your understanding of Buddhism. And so in those moments, I would just say, if somebody has a different particular opinion than you, just, be like, okay, great. It doesn't work for me. And, and I want to be clear that I'm coming from the point of view of somebody who does use the Dharma to inform my own understandings of what it means to be involved politically and socially in the world. And I'm a radical leftist from Berkeley. So, if you don't like that, then then you might disagree with me.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes, Diane.
I would like to ask Reverend Harada, after all, you're the bishop, what is our practice?
I'm like, Scott, now, are you recording this or not? It depends. I think it depends. If just a newcomer comes to the temple and they're really looking for a very simple answer, I would say that our central practice is to listen to the Dharma. But I think we should talk very positively about saying the Nembutsu, the importance of saying the Nembutsu, saying Namo Amida Butsu. And the Keisuke said, sometimes we don't say it in our temples. We only say it when the minister or the chairperson leads us. But we should be saying Nembutsu, and then at some point in time, it'll spontaneously come from it. So I have no qualms about saying our practice is to listen to the teaching and to say Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu.
Yeah, because I brought up that is a bit. Personally, I was hesitated to say Nembutsu when I was back in Kyoto, so because it was not my practice. So, and I hated to expressing myself in front of people and differently. So that is based on that experience. And I'm thinking is how we can express our religious or some spirituality into the world. It is very important topic in how the Pure Land Buddhism or Shinbuddhism is, how to say, I cannot say remain or expanding, but it's some existing in some, as a community in this country and in this culture as well.
Yeah, I heard Sugihara Sensei's service this morning where he is going through the different wasans and talking about meaning of wasans. And today he brought up a very I thought was an important part, that we should be very grateful and thankful that we can still hear the Dharma after 2,000 years. And to express this thankfulness and gratitude, we say Naman Dabas. It's just like chanting. We chant, and it's part of the sutras that we're chanting. Be it Juni Rai, Jusege, Amida Kyo, and for chanting and hearing that, that's the Dharma right there. And we say Naman Dabas after that to say, thank you so much, Amida, with gratitude and thankfulness. And when I used to work at JSC, Kurohawa Sensei and Umeda Sensei, we used to get together in the kodo and chant Shoshinge. And it was very interesting. They used to tell me, you chant with a loud voice because it's to like chanting to Amida and expressing, thank you so much, with thankfulness and gratitude for the teachings.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I think that gratitude is definitely a part of this conversation. I see that Yumi has sent a chat as well about the long-term trauma issues, about the camps and assimilation and cultural erasure. I think this is a great question, Yumi, and this is actually one of the, I have a couple things to say about this. This is one of the things that I'm interested in doing my current research on. specifically the ways in which the community sort of remakes itself during the resettlement period later in the 1950s. But also, the other thing I want to say is that I think Todd Suchia is here with us, and he wrote a paper for me in my class last semester about cultural trauma, which was really, really interesting. Ways to think about, trauma is a term that we usually think of as sort of an individual thing, whether you've broken a bone or have some psychological trauma like PTSD. But there's this other concept of cultural trauma or generational trauma, a thing that happens to a whole community of people. And I think this is a really important thing to think about, or to acknowledge, or to be honest about, as part of those conversations that Rick brought up and others brought up earlier about long-term effects of the community and these issues of how does the community see itself in relationship to the white majority, to mainstream culture. It's not that racism just went away, or that all those questions. So I think that this is an interesting area of research that I would really encourage people to think about. And then let's see. Ron Gee is asking a rather legal question about people saying we shouldn't be involved in political activities because we might lose nonprofit status. I think that's that's not. Yes, that's a red herring of an argument. A temple can't lose its nonprofit status just for somebody saying that I'm going to vote Democrat. That's not how the law works. But also, the other thing that I would say about that, I see this term, nonprofit status thrown around a lot. That there's, that in America we have this sharp separation of church and state, and churches don't have to pay taxes. Churches don't pay income taxes, but churches do pay taxes. Everybody who's working this morning, we all get a paycheck, and our paychecks get deducted. We have workers' comp taken out. I contribute to Social Security, right? So even though nonprofits might not pay income taxes, the community itself is somehow involved in the sort of economic structure of the United States of America. I say this not to say that that's the way it should be or whatever else. I'm just saying that we use these terms in ways that I think, again, sort of point to a sort of simplistic understanding of things that are far more complex. So if somebody says to you, you shouldn't talk about politics because we might lose our political, or might lose our nonprofit status, you can say, don't worry about it. I talked to Dr. Mitchell, and he's a tax attorney. Not really, I'm not a tax attorney. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Let's see. And then Leo has asked a question about the mindfulness meditation movement, and if there's a place for it in Shin Buddhism. I'm not going to answer that question. My feeling is that whether or not, if an individual wants to do mindfulness meditation, that's fantastic. Whether or not an individual community or an individual PCA minister or Kaikyoshi minister wants to endorse mindfulness, that's totally up to them. I'm not going to make a pronouncement about whether or not that's theologically appropriate within Shin Buddhism. I don't believe that's my place. That's the bishop's place. He can make that decision. But I do think that mindfulness has become obviously very popular right now. I wrote this thing several years ago where I made some comment about how when I was in college and just starting grad school, you would go to the bookstore when we still had bookstores, and there would be a section for religion or spirituality, and all of the books were titled Zen and the Art of something, right? Zen and the Art of Parenting, Zen and the Art of this, Zen and the Art of that. Now, when you go to Amazon, you can find the exact same titles, only they've swapped out Zen for meditation, for mindfulness. Mindful parenting, mindful eating. Jeff Wilson has a whole book on mindfulness. He could say way more about this than I could. So there's definitely there's some validity to this movement. It's different from the way in which Zen came into this country. So I don't want to make that false equivalency. But there's also a sort of pop cultural moment that mindfulness has that I think could be very alluring or very attractive to people. So I would say be mindful about being sucked into sort of jumping on a particular pop cultural trend without really being thoughtful about why you're doing it. You know, if you want to include mindfulness in your practice, you know, why? What's the purpose of that? Is it just because everybody else is doing it, or does it actually helping you alleviate suffering? So that's that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mitchell. We are now nearing the 12:30 hour of the session, so I think this would be a good stopping point for the formal part of the session. I'd like to turn it over now to CBE Director, Reverend Jerry Hirano.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'd like to especially thank Dr. Scott Mitchell for beginning these two talks on looking to the future of American Buddhism. I think it's a very relevant talk, so hopefully you can stay on a little longer to answer any more discussion questions, but don't answer everything because next week we have to continue on. So we'll close with Gassho. Thank you, please. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.